until they get here. June?
Good morning, everybody. My name is June Shorthair. I'm the Civic Engagement Specialist for the Phoenix Indian Center. This morning, we have the privilege of having a gentleman come and say a blessing for today to make sure we start with a good feeling, to make sure we're focused. This is a wonderful forum that you've had, but also it's good to end it in the right way. And I'd like to have Mr. Dwight Francisco from Donna Autumn, and he will be here to do a blessing for everyone. Dwight?
Skugsiarim. Achim Autumn, but Achim Jay again. Saptahadak, Naki, Huma up the market, Dashuk, the Natakamui. So, in our way, when we acknowledge this beautiful time that we have to celebrate another day of life, we say Skugsiarim. Say it. How o Skugsiarim. Aham Autumn Kach, Moya Haichuk, you chit and Monon, si Sanyamichut. Not as more, be Haichuk, Hugam Autumn, si Samachuk, Autumn Yok. I just asked in my language if anybody was here from Autumn, if you can raise your hand, if you can understand my language. And I don't know if there's any Autumn here. Are there any Autumn that are here? All right, you're all my guests today then. Hey, there's no wonder why I didn't recognize any faces except for June and Juliana and where's Rosetta? There you are, my beautiful friend Rosetta. She's just everywhere, that lady. Hey, very, very engaged and active in our community. Thank you for all your work. This morning I want to offer a prayer to Creator, not only for the day that we've been given to acknowledge and celebrate life today in the variety of ways that we celebrate it, but also to acknowledge that for the last 3 days, there are probably a lot of conversations that have been had surrounding our identity as Native people. I had a very interesting experience pulling into the parking lot this morning. A woman, my prayers are for you, waved me down, and she was sexually accosted in our parking lot here on our Indian community. So don't tell me that those issues don't matter to us, because they do. Stuff is still happening in our communities, and we need to be ready to stand up and advocate and speak up for ourselves. I work in residential treatment. Most of the work I do as a cultural counselor is related to helping people heal from substance use disorders, and I tell them the moment they walk in the door, alcohol and drugs are not your problem. They are a symptom of the problem, and the problem is that we have unresolved intergenerational trauma that has been passed on for decades, and now it is time for our people to heal. And that is my job today. It's a job I take very seriously, and I'm grateful that I've been given the opportunity to come into to open your last day here together and to ask for you to continue to do whatever it is that you're doing to advocate on behalf of our people, our elders, our sick and our suffering, our children, the 7 generations ahead. So my prayer today, I'm going to ask for Creator to give us strength to continue to help us to recognize the courage that He instilled in us the day we were born, and to help us to continue to strive to be good to one another in the way that He intended us to be when He gifted us the most precious gift that we could ever have, and that's life. So I want to say thank you today for the opportunity to come and to share a little bit, and then to open up in this prayer. Chúa con kỳ chôn nào ôi cả piu sa nhem hau sa nhem Chúa con kỳ chôn nào ôi cả piu sa nhem hau sa nhem Sia ring ta kyo sa nhem hu dong nya ta kyo sa nhem Chúa con kỳ chôn nào ôi cả piu sa nhem hau sa nhem Hoa paring ta kyo sa nhem Uy nhoi ma ta kyo sa nhem Chúa con kỳ chôn nào ôi cả piu sa nhem hau sa nhem Sapo am. Thank you.
Just want a light screen now? Arizona map.
Lamatalangwa, nahapi lamatavi ang matua, Raymond Namoki ang paha matua, sa palang aksino, hunungwa. Good morning, everyone. My name is Raymond Namoki. I am the Hopi Tribal Council Sapalawi Village representative. I am a member of the Bear Clan. It is a great honor to introduce Mr. Representative Ruben Gallego. Representative Gallego was born in Chicago. He is a second-generation American. His mother is Colombian and his father is Mexican. His mother raised him alone. Gallego attended Harvard University and graduated with a BA in International Relations. He joined the Marines while at Harvard and deployed to Iraq as a Lance Corporal and was in combat. Upon his return to the U.S., he entered Arizona politics, eventually winning a seat in the Arizona State House and eventually United States Congress. Representative Gallego is facing off against Kerry Lake for the Senate seat vacated by Senator Kirsten Sinema. Gallego is currently leading Lake in the polls by 6.3 points. Representative Gallego has been on the House Subcommittee of Indian and Insular Affairs. In each Congress that he has served, he actively chose this role and position to help Indian country. He has been a leading voice. Some of the issues that Representative Gallego has helped the tribe with include the following: Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement Act. He co-sponsored the tribe's water settlement bill and spoke powerfully during the subcommittee legislative hearing on the bill. Hopi Arsenic Mitigation Project. He took part in the hearings where the tribe advocated for more funding for the hemp project. He helped secure that through appropriations process. Bears Ears. He has been a major supporter and advocate for the protection of bears' ears. Veterans issues. He has introduced numerous bills to help Native veterans. ICWA. He has helped lead the effort to stand up to the Supreme Court, potentially overturning the Indian Child Welfare Act. He supported massive influx and funding that the tribe received in the CARES Act and ARPA Act. With that, will you please join me in welcoming Representative Gallego.
Well, it is my pleasure to be here, and it's great when you come to meet your leaders and they say, good to see you again. It means you've been doing your job to get out and meet your communities. I'm very proud to be running to be U.S. Senator, and I'm very proud that this campaign from day one has been investing in our tribal nations and not just waiting till last minute to speak to voters, but going and meeting with our tribal leaders and tribal organizations in their tribal lands. Of the 22 federally recognized tribes in Arizona, we have visited 19 of them, and we hope to finish the last 3. And I hope you got a little from the introduction that this is something that I care about my whole time, not just when it's an election year. Since getting to Congress, I have been on the subcommittee on Indigenous Affairs. I'm the past chairman of it too. I'm very proud to say that I had the first ever federal hearing on missing, murdered Indigenous women. I'm also sad to say, thank you. I'm also sad to say that that occurred in 2019. And the fact that it took that long for us as a federal government to do and actually fulfill our responsibilities, our trust and treaty responsibilities, and at least have a hearing, one that took that long. And it was a very moving hearing with myself and then Representative Deb Haaland, who is now Secretary of the Interior. But a lot we learned from that is the ongoing failure of the federal government to work well with our tribal nations, to actually engage them in consultation, to treat them with respect as co-equal partners, whether it is when it comes to water settlement acts that have been languishing for years, or to allowing and recognizing the fact that there's so many Native veterans that are left behind all the time because for some reason services can't reach them but can't reach other people. And I take this very personally and because for me, my family are Navajo. And when I say that, not biologically, but through war. My best friends that I met in Iraq 20 years ago were 2 Navajo brothers, John and Cheston Bailon. And we went through some of the most traumatic aspects of war, including combat as well as returning from combat. And we were all fairly traumatized from that war and bringing the scars of war home with us in PTSD. And it's with them that I healed as much as I can from PTSD. And we did it together. And we also did it on Dene land, where we went through their customs of how to deal with returning warriors. And ever since then, it has been a deep personal commitment of mine to make sure that Indian country, no matter where it is, not just in Arizona, is taken care of, is respected, is given the opportunity to succeed. Because just because you may be on tribal land does not mean that you don't have the same opportunity, or should not have the same opportunity as the American dream as I had growing up on the south side of Chicago. Because there are many Native American women that are raising their children on their own, much like my mom did, and just want to make sure that those kids have a very good opportunity, have an opportunity to go to a good school, whether it's BIE run or not BIE run, to have an opportunity to get a good paying job, and that they're going to be able to succeed in life, but without denying the fact that there are just extra barriers, and there are a lot more hurdles in Indian country. And so it is my goal, my job, my objective, and especially should I be lucky enough to win this Senate seat and lucky enough to be put on the Indian Affairs Committee, that I will continue to be breaking down the barriers to make sure that Indian country has a chance to thrive, has a chance to have sovereignty or continue to have sovereignty, and that the federal government, again, treats our tribal governments as co-equal partners, is treated with respect and with consultation, real consultation, not just the perfunctory afterwards where we say that, well, we talked to you, didn't we? So that's what I will be bringing to this office, a real love for our Native American brothers and sisters, for the family that I was returned to, and for the deep respect for our tribal government. So thank you so much already for all the tribal leaders that have supported me in the past, for those that have also been very key in my educational growth, for learning how to be a better leader for Arizona and for our 22 federally recognized tribes. And we will continue to grow, learn, and fight for Indian country. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you guys at the victory party. Thank you.
All right, what we'd like to do, it's our last day. We want to actually, you want to do the blessing, the smudging here, or? Actually, they let us, hey, yesterday, they thought there was a fire here. We burnt so much sage. And that, okay, yeah, because that, if I lose them, it'll take me an hour to find them and get it back if you take them outside. So if you don't mind, once you're ready, let me know, and then how you want to come in this way, or how do you want to do it? Okay, if we can just line up in a kind of like a horseshoe, not an upside down one, you lose your luck. We're at a casino. By the time we get done today, you guys will be full of cedar, sage. My brother there, he's going to be closing it up and just, yesterday Alice did it, it looked like a fog. Remember that movie? All of a sudden, it dispensed, and we saw Stacy. Well, he's getting ready. I'll kind of give you a real quick. It's going to be a short day today. We're actually going to have 3 panels instead of 2. But again, it's just so important that we try to get the information out to you so you have an idea what Indian country is fighting for every day, 365 days a year. Oh, no, that's mine. So we'll get this going. We will get done by noon, but there's just so much more information that we want to share with you. So we'll move it along, and we'll get this done today. And just so you know, so far in the past 2 days, we've had, with the people in here and the views online, is over 1,000 people have been watching what's going on here. So thank you. Of course.
I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that one of the reasons Ruben Gallego is running for Senate is Indigenous leadership, activism, and organizing here in Arizona is what got Senator Sinema to step aside. I was one of the students at ASU who asked her about the Build Back Better Act when she was telling President Biden her constituents did not care about the bill, and here we approached her and asked her about it at Arizona State University. It became viral when they got like 10 million views within an hour. And the next day we found her on the plane. As soon as she landed in D.C., we had people approach her and ask her the same question, and she finally, she could not get a day of peace after that. She finally stepped aside.
Well, and that's the other thing I want you to know is that parties don't win elections. It's the grassroots organizations that have their issues, that have their people that win or puts a candidate in office. So, you know, if a candidate lost, it wasn't because of grassroots, it's because they didn't have grassroots. So I appreciate everybody. Wopila, thank you very much. You know, we needed this today, so I appreciate you even taking more time than you planned to help our people. So Wopila, thank you. I'm going to give everybody 5 minutes, which means I'll have to look for you in about 10. So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and then once we come back, we're going to start out with United States Post Office in the systemic racism. And it better be good because the professor threatened to kill me twice now. She sat down to eat, and I go, oh, did you know you're going to be doing this? She go, what? So let's take 5 minutes, and then we'll come back in here, we'll get this show on the road, and we'll get done, be able to go home about noon, and I gotta have a smoke. Okay. Lilawashte. All right, here's our plan. We're going to have 3 panels. All of them are very, very important. The first one we're going to have, when I first heard about this, I knew it, but I didn't know it. It just made perfect sense after Dr. Sherdal explained how the post office was basically built through racism. And I've had her yell at me a few times, says, I don't want to know how it happened, just tell how we got there. But, so we're going to have Dr. Sherdal and Chris McClure come up, please. And we're going to talk about the United States Post Office and different things. All I can tell you is Dr. Sherdal was a professor at Claremont University, graduate university. You got to sit up here. And she's done so many things for Indian country, so many academic studies that, you know, I can't keep track of all of them. But she, this one on the post office, just, it amazed me and it made me mad. We've actually been working with Congress from the information that she had. Now, Chris, he has worked as our attorney on some of our 4 direction cases. If you have horses, hide them.
Uh-oh, the secret's gonna be out here soon.
So with that, I want to start this panel off. I will be the moderator, which means I won't say much, and I'll say, go ahead, take it over, Chris.
All right, thanks. Lest you're not Sue, you may not know OJ's reference. I am Chris McClure. I worked with 4 Directions on the Yazzie case down here. I am 1/8 Pawnee, which is pretty hard to come by these days because they don't have a reservation. They've all integrated. I didn't even know until I was in my teens. So
They still steal horses. Don't,
The
you know.
problem.
Yeah, don't
haven't seen
say
any
like
while I'm
everything's
here.
okay.
I haven't seen any while I'm here, so I don't know what I would do. But so I worked on the Yazzie case, learned, you know, in that process, you know, we had some issues with the Postal Service because mail-in voting became so important. With COVID going on, we were really concerned that a vast majority of the votes were going to be through the mail, which was, even the majority in Arizona had started, that shifted in 2010, where that became the majority. So we were long past that in 2020, and we were at a point where we're looking at a large percentage, you know, in that 2020 election, I think almost 75, 80%, if I recall, were mail-in ballots. And so we were really worried about that during that election, and and it will be an issue going forward. That's just, it's a very easy way for a lot of people to mail things. It turned out, for a lot of our natives on the reservations in Arizona here, it is not easy. You don't get mail to your house. You don't get those easy ways to do it. And the laws in Arizona required that the ballots be in by election day. And it was taking up to 10 days for mail to get from Dennehotso into the county auditor. And it was causing problems where nobody would tell them that, hey, you know, it's just, oh, it's got to be in by the day. But they don't know how long that's going to be. Nobody had checked. We started then, and that kind of led us into a lot of research and discussion that Jean had done. And Jean's research is in depth, and she knows a lot more about the history, and I'm going to let her talk about that. The one other thing that I have to talk about, and this is just kind of a thing that we learned during that election, or in that election and that lawsuit. There was a lawsuit in New York as well. It was the Jones versus the UPS case, or USPS case, and the postal master, being named in that matter, made a new guidance for the U.S. Postal Service during that time. Even under Trump, not the guidance they probably wanted from the Trump administration, but they were trying to settle this lawsuit. And so what they did was they agreed to do various things. And you should know that these things are available for ballots, because this is something that you're allowed to complain about. And if they do it wrong, there are punishments for the post office for it. they're required to take all election mail. Doesn't matter if it's postaged right. It doesn't matter if it's first class, bulk. It doesn't matter how it's postaged. They're required to take it and treat it as not an emergent, but an important mail that they have to kind of treat as basically first class, get it there quicker than they would depending on how you postaged it. So that was a big deal. In addition, once it became kind of the 26th, they kind of put in as a date in that matter. They were allowed to require more efforts to extra pickups, extra drop-offs, and they're required to pay overtime for a lot of the people who are working there where they didn't want to, but to get this deal made, they said, listen, these votes are so important. Clearly in the future, that's going to be a heavily used part of the election process. And so they determined in that matter that the post office agreed to do all of these things. The one thing we talked about in Yazzie with the Secretary of State, they were working with the post office directly. They had said and they had hoped that we would be able to get the post office to go keep the election ballots separate, and then they would just bring them the last day of the election day, and they would just bring them at the end of the day. And they had discussed that, and there was some hope that that might work, and all they could ever give us was maybe, and it never panned out yet. But it sounds like, from what I've heard, OJ's told me that Four Directions has taken that and has started working with Congress and is trying to get that passed through as a requirement so that the post offices themselves can kind of be a drop box location where if you go there and you vote and you hand off your ballot, that's good, and that'd be good across the nation. And that would be a big change and would be really good for all tribal citizens and honestly all citizens. So hopefully that's something that we can get the Congress guilted into, and that's the Postal Service information I have. Gene?
Okay, is this on? Am I on? Okay, thank you. You notice how a lawyer can just sit and talk and it's like just flowing out? I'm an oh, okay, still can't, okay.
Oh.
All right.
Gene, I forgot something that, see, because now you told me. This is very important. Somebody's missing a black cell phone. So if anyone has found said black cell phone, I was told to give an announcement. What's that? Oh, we have a black cell phone that is missing that someone has misplaced, and if somebody finds it, they would appreciate to get their phone back.
Okay. All right, as I was saying, attorneys, they can just sort of talk off the top of their heads. Academics like me, we have notes, so forgive me if I'm looking down periodically and I'm not flowing like those wonderful attorneys who are in the room. But voting by mail doesn't just affect people in Arizona or the Navajo Nation, as we saw in Yazzie. It's important to understand at this point, 29 states in the United States allow no excuse absentee voting, which is voting by mail. Another 5 states, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Utah, and Hawaii, do almost all vote by mail. Now, what we know about those states is they're not randomly distributed across the country. It's basically the West. And what else do we know about the West? We know it is where most Native people live. So voting by mail and access to voting in that way in a timely fashion is extraordinarily important for Native people. It's important for everyone, but it is particularly something that matters to Indian country. And what we also know, and I want to give a shout out here to the Native American Voting Rights Coalition, in 2016, with Four Directions and with NARF and NAVRC, we did a survey of over 2,000 Native people in the 4 states, South Dakota, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. I was part of the group that did South Dakota and Nevada with OJ and Barb and other folks here from 4D. NARF, with another political scientist, a man named Dan McCool, did the other 2 states' primary responsibility. But one of the most important findings that we came out of that study was questions about trust. And it turned out that when we asked about trust in different forms of voting, the type of voting that had the lowest trust, and we're talking about 27%, was voting by mail. In other words, Native people, for a variety of reasons, and probably more than we can go into today, have very little trust in VBM. But that didn't matter to the judge in the Yazzie case. It didn't matter to the judge in Yazzie, but it also did not matter to Justice Alito. Some of us may remember our wonderful Supreme Court. Justice Alito, in Brnovich decision 2021, he said, it doesn't matter that there are parts of the Arizona election law that disadvantage what he called small groups of people, in other words, Indian country. Yes, it disadvantages and discriminates on ballot collection and out-of-precinct voting, but don't worry because there are many other ways to vote. And then he went on to cite voting by mail and Pebble. But as my colleague here was just noting, in the Yazzie case, the judge there, he opined with no evidence. Please note, we showed evidence that access to voting by mail was much less in Navajo Nation than in the counties adjacent, the counties off reservation, those counties, and a lot of the letters did not show up in the 10 days that Chris just mentioned. But what did the judge say there, Judge Snow? What he said is, well, it might not be racism or anything related to race. It could be rurality. There are probably rural white folks in those 3 counties. We're talking about Coconino, Navajo, and Apache counties that have equally bad mail service. Now, he didn't have any evidence, but he asserted it. Well, what we did coming off of that is we decided to take Judge Snow's comments seriously and do a deep dive and investigated voting by mail in those 3 northeastern counties that included the Navajo Nation and off-reservation places. And we looked at 4 particular aspects. One, which OJ was mentioning earlier, the history. How did we get post offices where they are? You know, were they randomly sprinkled from on high and just turned up where they were? Okay, where were the history of post offices? What access do different groups of people have to post offices? What are the hours of available services and the range of services at those post offices? And then the one that you mentioned earlier, the mail delivery times. So we did a systematic analysis, the first time anyone has ever done this. Now, for most people in this country, voting by mail is simple. I mean, I'm in California. My ballot comes to my home. I don't even have to step out my front door to vote. I reach out, open the door, push the screen, reach out, take my ballot, fill it out, stick it back out there. I don't have to leave home. That's because I have what's called standard mail service, residential mail service that comes to my home. People who have non-standard mail service, which is most folks in this country who live on tribal lands, not 100%, but most, have what is called non-standard mail service. Basic bottom line, you don't get any mail at home. You have to go to a postal location, a post office or postal provider site. That means you have to travel. Sometimes, as we know, people have to travel a couple hundred miles. It also means then that you get your mail less often because you don't have the time or you don't have the money to pay for gas or cadging a ride to the postal location, so you don't get your mail as often. Well, that causes a problem for vote by mail. You have to think, if I get a ride to the post office now, is my ballot going to be there? Do I want to spend the gas mileage, the gas? So you think about it. That's a challenge. But it's also, you have to guess, once I get my ballot there, how long is it going to take for that ballot to go from the post office here to the election office? Do I have to fill it out right now in the post office? Or can I take it home and look at the issues and think about them? You don't know. These are challenges and there's uncertainty. This is uncertainty that other people who access vote by mail don't have to worry about. I don't have to worry about that at all. This, my friends, is a legacy of racism. There's a man called Paul Pierson, a historian, and what he wrote is, there is a stickiness of history. That's a great phrase, I love it. Stickiness of history. That means that social change is impeded even though the reasons for certain structural relations are long past. Things that happened in the past we're still stuck with them, a stickiness of history. And that applies to post offices in the western part of the United States. I can't talk about the East. I don't know anything about the East. Sorry, folks, if you're from the East. Nearly all of the post offices in the West, and if we want to be very specific, I did a deep dive into those 3 counties that I mentioned. Nearly all of them were established in the latter part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century, and they were established by folks who look like me, Anglo-Americans. They were designed to serve the interest of Anglo-Americans. First, they were established on forts to assist the US military. And secondarily, they were established to support economic interests of Anglo-Americans. So we're talking here about miners, ranchers, farmers, and then a little later we got some established for tourist reasons. You may remember we have this big hole in the ground here in Arizona that people like to come and look at. I can't remember what it's called.
Grand Canyon.
Thank you. Anyhow, so that's how we got post offices here. And there were a few established on the reservations, but again, mostly to assist the Anglo-Americans who lived on those reservations. So today, this is what geographers call spatiality of racism. You're getting all these fancy academic terms today. That's a good one, though, spatiality of racism. Most of the reservation post offices on the res were established as an adjunct to trading posts and serving that white population. As of January 1, 1920, more than 100 years ago, there were 65 post offices in Coconino, Navajo, and Apache counties. More than 2/3 of those were established and existed in off-reservation white communities. That pattern still exists to today. Right now, there are 78 post offices in those 3 counties, or postal locations, excuse me. 52 of them are actual USPS post offices. 26 are what are called postal provider sites. You probably know what those are. They're those little part-time places at mini-marts and gas stations. They're open only for a couple of hours and, you know, kind of this adjunct. 61.5% of those full-service post offices today are on non-tribal lands. 19% are on Hopi, Apache, and Havasupai lands. There are only 11 post offices in Arizona on the Navajo Nation. I mean, remember how big the Navajo Nation is? Well, we'll forget the Arizona, New Mexico parts, but you know, we're talking about roughly even the Arizona parts close to the size of West Virginia. So how many post offices are there, square miles? There's one post office for every 681 square miles on the Navajo Nation. I don't see that where I live in California. Most Navajo then have to get their mail at the postal provider sites, which have less hours of access and less services. Now, if you want to vote by mail, the hours of access are crucial. If the place is only open for a couple hours in the middle of the day and you have a job, how are you going to get your mail? So hours of access, it's not just how many post offices or postal provider sites, it's how often, how many hours are they open? Can I get there? So it's a very complicated process. So we compared that on and off reservation. Coconino County, the off-reservation, all of the off-reservation post offices were open for postal box access 24 hours a day, 7 days out of the week. 100% access. On the Navajo Nation, the Coconino ones varied in terms of their hours, 58 to 92. That contrasts with 168 hours on all of the off-reservation post offices. Apache County, similar. The off-reservation, almost all of them are 24/7, 168 hours. On the reservation, 30.3 hours per week, Apache County. Navajo County, little less for the white community, 71 to 92 hours. On-res, 43 hours. Now, when I've given this talk to other audiences, one of the first things somebody will raise their hand and they'll say, well, that's because, you know, they don't have very many people on the Navajo Nation. The difference is because of population. The white areas have more population, so the post office is just responding to population. No, just for the record, it cannot be explained by looking at population density. We brought that into account, and what we found was that off-reservation communities controlling for population still had more than twice as much access as people did on the Navajo Nation. But that's not all that we looked at, and some of this Chris was mentioning, because we did a real-world test. Imagine, you know, pretending, if you will, wherever Brett is, Brett did a chunk of this with us. What happens when we mail letters from these different places, and do tracking first-class mail? How long does it take to go from different postal locations to the election offices? And again, this is the first time people have done this. And so and it matters in Arizona because Arizona has a hard ballot receipt deadline. If your ballot, doesn't matter when it's postmarked, if it arrives after polls close on election day, it doesn't count. So it's got to get there in time. Well, remember in Yazzie, Judge Snow suggested that disparities that we found as part of that case that took up to 10 days from Daihatsu, he said maybe there's these white places that it's as bad. So what we did was we went out and we found the most rural, white population places that had postal locations off reservation in those 3 counties. And we did tracking. So we did 8 reservation place postal locations, 15 off-res locations, and 4 urban locations. We did the urban so we would have a benchmark, so they were Maricopa County. And so we did this systematic test. Now, the 4 off-reservation urban places, all the letters that we mailed arrived in less than 2 days. Now, at that time, the USPS standard was 1 to 3 days. So those guys got their ballots or the equivalent in really quickly. What about those off-reservation, mostly white locations? Well, there were 15 of those, and they arrived in less than 3 days. Not quite as fast as Maricopa County, but again, within what was at that time the 1 to 3 day standard for the USPS. 3 letters from the from Navajo Nation arrived within that 1 to 3 day window. 2 never arrived at all. We traced them and they disappeared. 1 actually ended up, we traced it all the way into South Dakota and it disappeared. I can't remember where the other one ended up. And other 3 took 4 to 7 days. Now I want you to stop and think, 7 days. We're talking about traveling 153 miles to the Apache County Election Office, and it took 7 days. Back in the 1870s, a letter could go from the West Coast to the East Coast or vice versa in 6 days. So it's now taking USPS longer for a letter mailed in Apache County from Navajo Nation than it took to go from San Francisco to New York in the 1870s. That, my friends, is not progress. So what are the takeaways? Okay, number 1, Judge Snow was wrong. I'm just going to say it flat out. Maybe he's going to sue me. The problem is not rurality. 2, the disparities in mail service are being recreated every single day. It's not just a historical legacy. We trace these letters, and there's no reason why something from Apache County should be going all the way to South Dakota to go 150 some miles. That's crazy. So it's being recreated every day. It's not just a legacy of past racism. 3rd, this means that off-reservation voters in Arizona, hey, you guys got it great. Your letters, your ballot's gonna get there in time. You know, you're good. But if you are on the Navajo Nation, I would be very hesitant. I'm telling everybody vote, but I'd be very hesitant about voting by mail or do it extraordinarily early because of that hard ballot receipt deadline. But we went one step further, okay? Because we've been looking at access to mail service. But we're talking about access to mail service with respect to voting. So the other piece that we examined was, were there differences between places on reservation that had better mail service versus those that had pretty lousy mail service? Is that a good technical term? Okay. So what we did was we examined 2020 turnout data from 6 Navajo Nation precincts, 3 with pretty good mail service, 3 with pretty bad mail service. The 3 with the least access were number 13, Denehatsu, where we keep mentioning Denehatsu, number 41, Mexican Water, and then number 54, Rock Point. Those 3 are an 870.7 square mile territory that does not have a single post office, not one post office, 870.7 miles, okay? There are 2 postal provider sites, both which have less than 20 hours a week access, and I might note that when we tried to mail something from one of those during the hours that were listed, we couldn't do so. So I wouldn't trust necessarily the posted hours. Those were the three: low access. High access, we looked at number 19, Fort Defiance, number 29, Kinlichi, number 88, Window Rock. They are 363 square mile area that had 3 post offices. 2020, the difference in turnout of the 2,920 registered voters in the low access one was 61%, but it was 71% in the high access. But when we looked at voting by mail, the disparity was even greater. 51.9% in the low access versus 73.4% high access. So a 21.5 point difference. It matters. So conclusion, I can see I'm supposed to wrap up. Sorry about this. The USPS is one of the most unlikely entities to be thought of as embedding structural racism. I mean, the post office's mantra, its mission statement says the USPS commits to, quote, providing prompt, reliable, and efficient service to patrons in all areas and all communities.
You can tell them that.
Well, let's hold USPS to this. Thank you.
My daughter Donna just has a couple things to say.
So with the mailing system, I was the one that drove around and mailed all these things from each county. With the mail system, if your stuff got there after 3:30 p.m., it would not go out till the next day, even if it was Priority Express. If it was on a Friday, it would not leave until Monday morning in these remote areas. So I paid, the only ones that did actually make it were mostly Priority Express and Priority Mail. And that, in each place, it was $46, and most people don't have the $46 to mail in their ballot to make it by election day. So anything that was certified mail or regular mail, usually about 50% did not make it. So just wanted to add that.
Okay, and again, I wanted this to happen because I really don't think people realize how much we lose out through voting by mail. And I'm saying it could work, but it has to work when we change the system. We change the system, we're going to be able to improve and increase the percentage of Native Americans participating. So, thank you, Jane. Thank you, Chris. You know, I'm gonna turn it over to Lacia. You can do that.
Well, Kumadab and Thief, good morning, and units, relatives. I am so thankful that we're able to have these conversations today on the last day of the voter forum here in Arizona. One of the priorities that Four Directions, Phoenix Indian Center, the Coalition of Large Tribes, and the Arizona tribal leaders had was to ensure that we were hearing from local voices. And what a better way to have a conversation today on our last day to capstone everything we've been talking about than a couple of incredible organizers who have been dedicating their careers and their lives to organizing around issues that are important to Native people here in Arizona. So it is my pleasure to invite the Executive Director of Arizona Native Vote, Janie Parrish, and Tribal Elder Rosetta Walker to the stage today. Please give them a warm welcome.
Testing. Oh, this works. Great, thank you. Good morning. As we get set up, we'll just maybe go into some introductions and then have a conversation. How about that? Let me put my chair this way. Do you want to go first, Rosetta?
Good morning, Rosetta Bad Hand Walker, Sakanga Lakota, enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe in South Dakota. I reside in Tempe, which sits on the homelands of the Akmil and A'atam Peepash peoples. I've been a resident here of Arizona since 1995 with my husband of 38 years and our 31-year-old daughter.
Thanks, Rosetta. And I actually first met Rosetta when I was a teenager, tour guide at the Heard Museum. The Heard Museum had an amazing tour guide program, and I took advantage of it. And Rosetta was there volunteering even then, so that was amazing. But yeah, it's Janie Parrish and Shia, the Bethlehem, the Shle, Ashim, Bashishin, Na Kaidnet, the Shiche, Do, Torich Inie, the Shanale. And originally from two communities. My father's side's from Kienta, and my mother is originally from Lupton, but I claim Window Rock because that's the two communities I equally grew up in growing up. And then it gets a little complicated because in high school I came down to high school down the road here at North High School, and then undergraduate at ASU. So I have actually 3 homes, but each parent is still in their home community, so that's still home. And I'm happy to talk about what we do with Arizona Native Vote, but I guess we can start with some conversations, maybe, you know, what you're doing and what's some of the priorities that you want the folks to know about your work, and we'll leave it there.
Well, I have been a community volunteer, community activist here in the Valley, basically since the early 90s when I moved here. And when I say community activist, I always tell the young students that I encounter, it's like, if you want to know what's going on in your community, in your town, then get involved. Whatever that looks like, you know, volunteer at your school, volunteer for an organization, you know, pack food boxes, donate your clothing. And that is community volunteers and community advocacy. And that's where the grassroots of my advocacy started. And when I met Miss Janie here, when we both worked at the Heard Museum, I saw the impact of their youth guide program. And I saw that, you know, she's a product of being part of advocacy within, as a student in high school. She chose to come out and participate in a guide program that was free and open and promoting activism within the Native American community here in the Valley. And thank you for that, because that's what we do. That's what I do. That's what I promote. And in fall of 2023 and spring semester 2020, fall 2022, spring of 2023, I was employed at Arizona State University by the American Indian Student Support Service Department as elder in residence. And that also gave me the opportunity to mentor the 3,800 students that attended Tempe campus in promoting voting, promoting volunteerism, promoting getting involved. And I utilize that platform to let students know there's multiple ways you can make a difference in your community. And it's all starts with volunteerism. Because if you look at some of our greatest programs that we've had here in the United States, you know, it started simply as a community corps, which was the road building that started back when World War I was to get people employed. That's where a lot of this community grassroots organization comes from. So it's, I just go from there, and I wear multiple hats in the community. I currently am a certified deputy registrar with Maricopa County Recorder's Office, which basically means I can register people to vote in the state of Arizona. I also sit on the Arizona Secretary of State's Voter Engagement Advisory Board, an appointed position, and I am an elected precinct committee person in Legislative District 12, serving, and just recently got elected to my 3rd term. So there's multiple ways we can stay engaged.
And it all depends on how much time you want to give to your community. It could be as little as 1 hour a week, it could be 3 hours a month. It's up to you. It's up to you what you want your community to look like.
Thank you, Rosetta. That's great. And actually, I'm going to pull all of this together for a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. But so I grew up, like I said, in high school here in the Valley. I went to ASU, and I was really privileged to be a student of the great faculty, Native faculty and staff at ASU. And my mentor was Mr. Peterson Zaw. He was there. We lost him a year and a half ago. But essentially what ASU is because of him. They were having problems retaining students, recruiting any Native faculty or staff, and what he did was create the premier civic engagement model for a university to engage and implement. And I didn't know that at the time, but I knew he was there. And I didn't know exactly what he did, but I knew it was important. And once I started learning from all the classes I was in and seeing how change was being made, through policy, through the justice courses, through academia, through everything, I got to see the connection. So when ASU was having these troubles of recruiting and retaining students, back then the president was Laddie Corr. And Laddie Corr have a relationship. They played high school football against each other. Mr. Zaw was at the Indian school. Laddie Corr was at the white schools down the road. And, you know, I learned about the history of our leaders in the 1960s. It was Mr. Zaw, Wayne Taylor, it was Ronnie Lupe, and Gila River, Mr. Lewis, the late Ron Lewis. They were all students together at ASU. They eventually went on to become really pivotal leaders in their communities, but they knew each other as kids, as students, and worked together to rebuild their nations. So knowing that we had someone like this at ASU to help strengthen the relationship with tribes was pivotal. They never had a special advisor to the president on American Indian Affairs before Mr. Zaw. And what he did is he went to work through the law school, through healthcare, through education, all the schools, to try to get them to understand how helpful it would be if they were partners with tribes in the state that they are in. And it became such a great success with so many working relationships and organizing that now we have ASU, the premier institution with the most Native graduates, the most Native faculty and staff, the premier student services programs, and other universities started adopting that model. So now we have special advisors all over Arizona and throughout the country. And so I was learning from this person what he was doing. And I said, we could, you know, he was actually, him and his wife, Rosra, told me, and they place students, you know, Rosetta talked to many students, and this is, I think, a profound example of people like him and others who take us on when we're kids and help guide us or show us or get us involved, take us to meetings with them. And we don't know yet at the time, but it helps us. And so with Mr. Zaw, I was able to work with him for 8 years after I graduated. I went away for a bit, you know, but he continued to nurture me, him and his wife. And he would say, Janie, what's your plans? He'd give me a call. And then he would do that not just with me, but with hundreds of students. What's your plans? Where are you going to work? What job are you going to apply for? And I didn't know it, but he was strategically placing many of us in positions that he knew we would make a difference. Lawyers. He helped students get money to go be a pilot, to be in law school, medical school. And I was wandering. I wasn't quite sure where I was going to go. He wanted me to go to law school because he created the program that helps fund Navajo students almost 100% if they want to go to law school at ASU. But I found politics and campaigning along the way, and I started taking all of these things together in my tool bag, as you would say. And then I started working on campaigns. It was the first time, I thought I was going to be a dean or a provost at ASU because I was there for 8 years. But I left, and then I went to go work my first job registering voters. And it was in 2012 in the Obama campaign. And I was like, I like this. I don't know what I'm doing all the time, but I like it. I like that I'm in the communities, and I like that I'm putting to use all the knowledge. And then I started being on presidential campaigns, congressional campaigns, and then all these other great campaigns around the country, but not in Arizona. I started realizing really quickly we were the only ones, like usually, we're the only ones in the campaign, and nobody talks about tribes and nobody prioritized our communities, but I found I gained skills in all of that. So Mr. Zah, again, in every pivotal part of my life, called me home in 2020 because I was in DC working for Emily's List. And he said, him and our past senator, previous senator, Orlando Teller, our previous senator, Gemma Sita, our county supervisor, first ever Native woman to sit on the county board of supervisors for Navajo County, Donna Faye Weitzinger, they were all on the phone. And this was like, because Mr. Zah knew I was struggling, and I said, I want to come home, it's a pivotal election, but I'm not sure where. And his answer was to get me on the phone and talk to all of these folks, and they talked to me in a way that I didn't know I needed. They basically said, we need you at home. You've been doing all this great, wonderful work out in the world, and we need you to do it here. And so it was the first time I actually came home and organized in Arizona in my own state. And I started on the party side from 2020 to just last year. But there's a lot of gaps and lacking things in the party system. It's not perfect. I was frustrated. I kept butting my head, you know, we can't get funding. How come they don't hire our people? Like all the things we would go through year after year, but our people still turned out. And that was because we had local grassroots organizers and volunteers doing the work from the very beginning. And so our team on the party side was doing things, but I'm gonna fast forward to the party because now I'm representing a nonpartisan organization, but I got my grounding work there with our team. And our because we knew all the lacks in the structure, in the party structure, especially the funding structure real quick, and we couldn't be in places like schools or healthcare centers or governments because people are weary about party politics, and I understand why. But we were able to start a C3. In January of 2023, everything was moving fast. And we got funding. Some of our team came with us from Navajo, Hopi, and White Mountain. Our strategy was be local, hire our own local matriarchs and firekeepers who are already doing this work. Many of them did it for free, but we don't want to have them do it for free. We go into the classrooms with our own Indigenous democracy classes. We educate folks on the entire ballot. Our goal is a 2% voter turnout, and we know how that by looking at precinct data. We get people on early active voting lists, so they do vote by mail, because a lot of our people already are, and they vote early. And so I forgot what I heard earlier saying don't vote by mail, but that's not true. It's like our people vote, especially in 2020, and it's like vote early and by mail and by all these things, not just that it doesn't work, but it shows in our case that our people vote early and they vote by mail, and especially starting in 2020. So it is crucial. That is one of our biggest groups, and the reliable voters. And we vote and we do all this. So we're grassroots, we're field, meaning that there are people that do different things to help contribute to this whole process, right? So Patty, who was on the seat with us, they're the lawyers. They go and fight for our voting rights to help with election protection. We're field, we do the dishes, we get the voters out, we get them informed, we do the things on the ground, and like Rosetta does as well here in the urban area. So we're all pulling together from different ways, but our work from 2019, because we were the only consistent year-round field organizing group from 2020 to this year, meaning it doesn't stop or start at elections or a few months before an election ends or begins. We're there year-round talking about this stuff. And it showed our two precincts, Navajo and Apache, were the only ones that saw a slight increase in turnout compared to all the other counties in the state of Arizona. So we know that our team of 5, then 15, and we had up to 30 at one point, one election year, that it's working. And so we gotta keep doing better, and we gotta keep improving every year. But I wanna leave it at that, and then we'll allow for more, but I just wanted to give you a quick rundown and outline, and then we'll have more conversations about stuff, but thank you.
And I'm very proud of the work that Janie and her team has done on Navajo Nation and across the state of Arizona. You know, I come in as a volunteer and look through it through a different lens. And I'm looking at the information that we do as poll workers. In fact, I just signed up to be a poll worker in the general election. This is my 24th year being a poll worker, being involved with the political process. And it's a 12-day site, which basically means I'm going to be sitting at the polls, taking your ballot, your early ballot, giving you a ballot so you can vote on site starting October 25th. And that is a paid position. Anybody can be a poll worker. In fact, in summing up some of this conversation on get out the vote, voter outreach, voter engagement, none of that will make a difference if there isn't poll workers at the polls where you walk in that door to cast your ballot. We do an outreach here in Maricopa County for poll worker training, poll workers, and we employ over 2,500 people in just Maricopa County alone for poll workers. Across Maricopa County, which Maricopa County, if you're not familiar with Arizona, is a very expansive county. We're here from Fountain Hills all the way down to Yuma. You know, we almost go to Tucson. We border Pinal County. We have a sliver of Gila River. We have Salt River in our county. But the overwhelming thing is we're very large land base. So we need a lot of poll sites. We need a lot of poll locations. We need a lot of people to work those polls. So if you ever find yourself that you got a day off or take a day off, in fact, when I used to work in the corporate world, I would get days off. I would take my personal time to go be a poll worker because it's so meaningful. And it can be hard work. Yes, it's a very long day. The polls open at 6 a.m. and they close at 7 p.m. That does not include setup and breakdown. My 12-day site, I will be on site starting Friday, October 25th, up until 7 p.m. on November 5th. And do it. It's very rewarding work. It can be somewhat frustrating work. You know, it's not always glorious work, but you know that you've made an impact when you see that line down the sidewalk and you see that person in a wheelchair coming to cast their ballot. It's just, I don't know, it's just something that's so near and dear to me that all the work collectively that we do across Indian country, we do it because we're coming from our hearts. We do it because the generations that fought for that right. My grandfather from the Rosebud Sioux tribe fought in World War I, came home and couldn't vote. My father fought in World War II, came home and couldn't vote. So the stories that are shared here, collectively, don't let that go to waste. Exercise that right to vote.
Thank you, Rosetta. That's powerful. And that's exactly what it is, right? Thank you. Yes, give her an applause. And you're reminding me again the basis, which I wanted to give you the quick presentation, but why does all of this even matter? And it's going back to that, because we're losing our folks that have been doing this. We lost Mr. Zah a year and a half ago. I can say his name without crying. and we've lost two incredible matriarchs who did this, like Rosetta, for years, because they believed in voting rights. Loretta Chino, who's a strong organizer from Tuba City, Joanne Peshlikai and Winder Rock, like they would bring their whole families out. It would be a family affair where they would register voters, set up the table, the canopy, wind, snow, cold, rain, and they would register for Navajo elections or state. And, you know, that tradition, that spirit is what we wanted to carry on through Arizona Native Vote, so that we can have younger organizers and fire keepers that are doing this, that they may go and be the lawyer or the doctor, which is phenomenal, but they're gonna be able to tie this in with that work too, because grassroots and organizing is not separate from fighting for our rights in the courts or in government, especially not government, or in Congress. It's all tied together. So we're hoping that we build through our Indigenous democracy classes. I'm so proud of our young people. They've booked 7 high schools now across Navajo Nation. We're getting into White Mountain Apache with our team there. Just to give you a quick layout, I forgot to do that. We have almost 20 people now on staff of our team. A Core 4 on Hopi, a Core 4 on White Mountain Apache, and a Core 4 on Navajo Nation, but we have assistants that are coming in to help. So we are growing. We grow more in election years, but we'll taper off after. But again, this work is year-round. So our youth organizers right now, they're focusing on juniors and seniors that are being registered and that can vote for the first time this year. And then, like right now, our White Mountain Apache team, they are doing fun things similar to Allie, where they're doing beadwork and GeoTV competition. They're doing, recently we had a goat roping tournament in Blue Gap from our Navajo organizers, because they know goat roping's huge. It brings out a lot of people. And they had great prizes, and you had to enter, you had to check your voter status, and if you weren't registered, you had to register on the spot and other things. So they're getting creative with the ways of making this work fun and part of our communities. And our matriarchs, the ones that have been doing this for generations, like Lucy Ben and Maria Calamity, they're retired, but they're fluent speakers. They know so many people. They're culture keepers. Like, if anybody wants to have ceremony done, everybody goes to Lucy Ben's home area, her homestead in around Blue Gap. And they do bingo, and they do so many things to make this engaging and fun and meeting people where they at. So Lucy and Maria, not only are they now not retired because they're working with us, but they're in the classrooms. They're in the classrooms working with our young organizers that are trying to inspire the newer generation and help guide those that are 17, 18, 19 right now. So our team is intergenerational. Our youngest staff member is 19, our oldest is 76, and they all work together. They all help each other. When White Mountain needs help, the team will pack up and go to White River Parade. We're having some more events coming up like that. And then, you know, we just added a new team member. We're figuring out a way to support, because even though we focus mostly on Navajo, White Mountain, and Hopi, we know this is state broad. And honestly, our goal as the board and our field team knew this back in 2020. We wanted to go statewide like Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight and all of that, but we wanted to do it from a grassroots point, from a field point, and so we're doing it slowly but surely. We're only a year and a half old, but we've done so much, and we raised a little bit over $1 million. I know, and we're trying to be that. We're trying to do what they've done, because they're setting a model for us in Georgia and other places. And so we've added a new team member, April Ignacio, down in Thanatam, because if you don't know them, they do great grassroots field work down there too. And there's others around the state we'll eventually get to, but right now we're trying to hone in and do what we do well here, and then, like we said, improve our playbook every year and just get better, because these kids are going to be Rosettas, they're going to be Lucys, they're going to be running for office, they're going to be running campaigns, they're going to be, you know, figuring out how to do the science and the data along with the fun events and things that are going on. So that's what Arizona Native Vote is. It's carrying on that legacy. It's getting them activated and, you know, showing them that what is organizing and what does all this mean tied to our vote? Why does this even matter, right? And that's the movement, the heart work, along with doing the practical, the data, the study, the actual strategy is that hard work to get people to move.
You know, and along those lines of doing outreach, at the Arizona Secretary's of State's office, which is Adrian Fontes, he is an elected official, and I do sit on the Voter Engagement Advisory Board. We're a group coalition of 25 members across the state, and there's only 2 natives in the state that sit on this appointed board, and it's kind of sad, but you know, we're constantly doing outreach, and we're trying to get more information out to the Native population. We host every fourth Tuesday of the month, we have a Native Vote Hour. It's all via Zoom. We invite anybody that wants to share information. You've been a past guest on our Native Vote Hour. I've been a past guest on the Native Vote Hour. And what we're trying to do is just take simple information or legislative information, break it down to digestible chunks, and feed it back out to you so that you know what's going on in the state legislature, you know what's going on with your elected officials, but in a manner that's really easy to take in. So we're going to have the Native Vote Hour in October, and we're looking for speakers. So I have a little flyer. If you want to be a speaker, want to tune in, feel free to connect with me.
Licia, do you have a time check? 1 minute. Okay, so we'll wrap up. But yes, being in the C3 space is new for me since I've been on the other side for so long, but a C4 is in the working for next year. And the other piece I didn't get to add is stay tuned, because Jolana and the team at the Phoenix Indian Center, and we're going to be working a lot closer together, because we know what we're doing at home needs to be done more here in Maricopa County too. So that'll be the eventual growth, but it's exciting times, and we work closely with the county elections. I always tell county elections, we're your extension. You don't have the budget, come talk to us and we'll figure something out. And so we love our county elections folks. They're very kind. They include us. Secretary of State, we recently had Millie, but I think they have somebody new now. But Millie's great. She's still working with us, and there's just so much knowledge, so much talent, and we're just pulling it all together to make sure that Arizona has incredible movement in voting and protections. So.
And I also do deputy registrar training. So if you need to know how to become a deputy registrar, to know how to register people to vote, I can help you with that too. So stay connected.
Thank you.
Instagram, Twitter, Facebook.
Yes, stay connected. Arizona Native Vote.
Oh, God. Is that the slide? Okay, we're almost done. You know, I wanted to, I added one more panel on because it's just so important in Indian country, and it has to do with boarding schools. So we're going to have that presentation next. So Jennifer and Dal, if you're ready. And I want to thank you young ladies for saying what you said. We not only do this, you know, we want organizations to be able to reach out all over. And we're, you know, we do have a lot of people watching this live stream. And so we're hoping what you said, they're going to be able to listen to, adopt it, and if not, contact you so that they're able to accomplish what you're doing. So thank you very much for that. You have a pointer? Who's got the pointer? All right, hold on, let me, hey, what do I need to do? Just get out of the way? Huh? The one, hold on. Let me figure out who I am. Yeah, you did, you did this partial. Yeah, this one.
This one?
Perfect. Not the,
Oh, not this one?
No,
Okay.
okay. This one?
This one, yeah. There's just 3 slides, I think.
And you got the clicker?
It's right here. I'm gonna give it to him now.
Uh-huh. Take it away.
Hello. Can you guys turn the mics on?
Well, good afternoon to all the hardcores here who are sticking it out with a variety of subjects, and it's been just an amazing set of speakers and really appreciative to be in the forum. This is a more somber subject for sure, and it's one that I think has a lot of dimensions to it. And we're just going to highlight a few things that are happening and more or less provide information about the kind of steps that are unfolding right now. And I think Jennifer's going to go over these few slides, and then I'd like to discuss some of the neuroscience behind it and some of the developments that have happened north of the border, up in First Nations in Canada, because they're a generation ahead of us on this subject matter, and so they have a lot of work done that is really important, and I think will be very helpful and informative as we share that information. So Jennifer?
Thanks, Del. Wanted to share the updates from the Department of the Interior's Federal Indian Boarding Schools investigative reports. The first report, which came out in 2022, really focused on cataloging what were the boarding schools, how many there were, trying to figure out the records that the federal government had. And they've pulled more than 90 million pages of documents, which are now stored in air caverns in Kansas, and trying to figure out what to do with the volume of records and information that's out there. Just within federal control. That's not private institutions, it's not tribal records, but really trying to shine light on what happened to tribal children in these boarding schools. The second report came out in July following Secretary Holland's Road to Healing tour, where she made, I think, 20 total stops around Indian country and spent days listening to people. This particular picture on screen is from her visit to Rosebud. Vice Chairman King was there with his brother Jim Miller, who passed, but very difficult, lengthy, emotional days where people would speak truths that they had never spoken before. Incredibly moving, incredibly difficult days. But what has come out of those sessions are recommendations for what the United States should do to try to begin healing from those efforts. And very happily for Colt, some of our primary recommendations have been adopted by the Department of the Interior, including number 1, land back. There's actually a series of statutes on the books from the early 1900s that mandate boarding schools' lands that are no longer used for missionary purposes revert to tribes. That's because when these schools were initially set up, they were set up as fee patents for a limited purpose, to provide for missionary education and the support of the school. But what quickly developed is that churches abused that policy and were acquiring thousands and thousands of acres of land within reservations and effectively using the children as slave labor. That's what a lot of the records that we've uncovered show, that boys would be out working in the field at sheep ranches. If they died in their work, they would just bury them where they fell. Lots of girls being required to work in textiles, to learn trades, to be abused, and setting up the land as the place that they would do that. So thousands of acres of land to support, schools with maybe dozens or hundreds of children at them. So in the early 1900s, Congress had started to cut back on that because the land grabs by the churches were so extensive. So they started passing these reversionary statutes saying, okay, well, when your mission is accomplished, when you're done with the education piece, then this land is going to go back to the tribal communities. The most recent statute is actually what we call the 1922 Act, but it requires any of that land that ceases to be used for a missionary purpose to go back to the tribe. And DOI accepted our recommendations, which were memorialized in Colt resolutions, in a National Congress of American Indians resolution. And if we could go to the next slide, please.
Yeah, if I could back up for a moment, though, and just maybe provide some information on how all this started, because we're going over the recommendations and these reports that are done. This all started when they found the mass graves up in British Columbia of the children when they did the LIDAR survey. So they found hundreds, if not thousands, of children's bodies that were not accounted for before. Secretary Holland got that news and said, I know we have the same thing happened here. We have to do something about it. So she decided to devote time and resources and personnel to start her own investigation without any prompting via lawsuit or congressional subpoenas for information. So in a way, the department and the agency is way ahead of the process that unfolded north of the border. They had a law passed up there, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that commission was chartered to investigate, find out all the information available from churches, NGOs, the federal government, the provinces and territories in that case, and catalog all of that and preserve those documents and histories while the people were still alive, to the extent they were. That process has not started here, but the Secretary of Interior, being indigenous, decided to go ahead and start it anyway. It goes to show you the kind of leadership that's there, whereas oftentimes people are forced to do this. She's voluntarily started the process that should still become part of a national reconciliation where there is legislation in Congress, and it's pending still. There's been movement on the bill, but they switched the name from Truth and Reconciliation to Truth and Healing. I don't know how far down a rabbit hole I want to go with those terms, but reconciliation means certain things for obligations around trying to reconcile. And in fact, that word has become kind of a standard term up north with First Nations, because they talk about reconciliation, and they have people who actually were hired to go into the communities to reconcile with them and to reconcile the information and the histories. And the reason I mention all of that is I've gone up north and visited many First Nations communities on the ground, and we've done healing workshops with them. The types of things that I experienced and saw in the last, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years are they turned their old boarding school into a museum to preserve the history and tell the story, and then had resources to examine what bodies were there. So they wanted to preserve the history, number one. And they wanted First Nations to have more say over the historic sites and to be able to have access and do ceremonies. Because there's some of these areas that are still held by third parties and church organizations. Some of them are compliant and some of them are defending themselves. And so you don't have universal access to the site or the information. And that's a problem that needs to be solved by legislation to force and utilize the subpoena power to require that information to be provided. I mention that because the other thing I saw was they started to raise money for new learning centers, education, and bring back the language and the ceremonies and teach the youth the stuff that was lost as a result of the boarding schools. And many of you know there are lost generations of families from places, of course, all the things that Jennifer already mentioned. And it's going to require a really systematic examination and healing efforts of all kinds. Certainly our cultural ceremonial piece will be central to that, but we need these other healing modalities around mental behavioral health, which we'll get into. But up north, they had the legislation, they subpoenaed the records, they had hearings all over the country. It led to the apology from their prime minister at the time, and eventually the Pope of the Catholic Church apologized. So we have a template for how to move forward. It's just kind of uneven down here. And then getting that information, it starts with the department that has most of the information to voluntarily start to catalog that, systematize it, and make it accessible for the communities. And this is, you know, efforts at roughly, I think both sides of the border have hundreds and hundreds of boarding schools, not just a sprinkled few around, but hundreds of institutions that were usually run by mostly Catholic, but other denominations as well. And the United States, in this case, actually set aside the land for the missionary purposes. And what they've also found through this, and there's a Native American Boarding School Coalition, if you've ever seen that, you can go to their website and get on their listserv for their updates and information, which I think is helpful because more and more people need to learn about this information and be advocates as well for the legislation and for the accountability of what happened. So this is, we knew number one, that hearing from tribes, they wanted those places back and set aside. That's step one. Step two is what information is out there? Can we find the names of the people who went through this? Are there graves? Are there, what is left? And so huge questions and lots of important information that's unfolding as we speak. And so this was one of the recommendations that COLT, through our advocacy, was got to get the land back first, preserve the site, get access to it, so the ceremonies can be performed and the healing can start, because it's going to take years. If it took, and the last thing before we jump to the next slide is that this all started in the 1830s and just ended in the 1990s. That's 160 years of boarding schools. I mean, just that, the chronology of that is overwhelming to think about, how long this has been going. And at least we have a template up north to see a process where we can see some progress for them. And so with that, that's the piece of this advocacy. So I just wanted to give that backdrop to why this work is important and how meaningful it'll become.
There actually is one point before we leave this slide. I just want to point out for the tribal leaders that it's page 103 of volume 2 that has this recommendation, and it says, upon request of tribes, DOI will undertake these land status reviews. So all you have to do is send a letter. It does not have to be complicated. You can send it to your superintendent. They will elevate that within Interior, and then they will undertake the title reviews that BIA ordinarily does with land records, and they'll do this for the tribe. So you don't have to expend your own resources to try to analyze this or get access to records you don't have. That's part of that information gathering that they did to begin with, so that all you have to do is ask, and then they will initiate this land back process. And this is the specific language of the 1922 Act. I just put it on the screen so you can read it, but it's mandatory. This isn't a discretionary decision. So all that DOI needs to determine is that the missionary purpose has concluded, and then that land shall revert to the Indian owners, which scares a lot of people, but this is federal law on the books, and all we have been asking for is for the DOI to enforce the federal law that's on the books. This has again been adopted by virtually every major intertribal organization as their policy request. DOI has had numerous meetings about it internally. There's Secretary Holland and Assistant Secretary Newland with us within Interior there, and of course back at her visit to Rosebud speaking there as well. There are also, in addition to the 1922 acts, various specific statutes for specific boarding schools, and I really want to highlight the Rapid City Indian Boarding School. There are statutes that require very specifically the reversion of those lands to Cheyenne River, the Oglala Sioux Tribe, and the Rosebud Sioux Tribe. And those three tribes have been unanimous in their repeated requests to begin that reversion process, and we're very hopeful that that will proceed soon and perhaps be the first enforced federally required reversion that takes place.
And I would say it's really important to have precedent so that this can happen wherever the tribal communities want it to happen. So it has to start somewhere and say, this is the law. It is going to create a lot of conflict. There are going to be people who feel very strongly in opposing the land back and also handing over the records. And what we've seen and experienced thus far is a fairly substantial resistance to having this be a peaceful transfer back, and that all the settled expectations of everyone around these places, somehow folks want to see addressed. Despite this, we know that the boarding school era is over, and from a tribal advocacy perspective, we think it's a pretty clear-cut case, but all the things that have happened over the years, the 100 years or more, people say, how are you going to address who's there now? And we have a difference of opinion with other people around who should be responsible for that. We think that's really the United States' responsibility to fix what happened, and we have to start somewhere, right? And then see how it unfolds, how the title goes back. And you see the efforts by the current administration as well on putting resources towards language, revitalization, and preservation. And we know that that's a really critical piece. But that's what they're doing up north as well with First Nations, and they're utilizing a lot of federal funds on that. I think we'll go to the next slide, and then I'll fill in some of the other experiences.
So the next slide highlights another recommendation from the DOI Volume 2 report, which is really important, and that's advancing the international relationships. That's something Colt has been working on, speaking at the United Nations. That's actually Secretary Holland at the United Nations in New York last year, and a group of Colt leaders with Secretary Holland at DOI last year as well. The focus, Colt Treasurer Lisa Whitepipe spoke on the floor in Geneva. Colt Chairman Marvin Weatherwax spoke on the floor at the UN in New York, really focusing on, well, what does the land reversion mean? Why do we want that? Not just because it's legally required, but to be able to start the healing work, to find the unmarked graves, to bury those children, to give the families the dignity that they deserve. Then, as Del mentioned, to be able to decide what to do with that land. And many tribes talk about wanting to use that in a restorative way, to start language immersion schools there, to use existing buildings as cultural facilities, to provide places of remembrance, museums, cultural gathering places, places where youth can feel safe and start to engage in those activities, and really centered around language in particular. Treasurer Whitepipe's comments in Geneva were focused on that, and she talked about her own grandfather as a code talker, and how native languages are the way that we learn how to relate to each other and the world. And that's what boarding schools took from us, and that's what these lands could bring back if they're used to focus on language and culture.
And I would add that, you know, having been up at Ontario, I went to a former site there, was invited by an amazingly powerful matriarch from the community, and she became the president of the new university, and she was a boarding school survivor. I mean, it just kind of gives me chills to, and you should hear her words of truth. I mean, they're so powerful. And at some point, with her permission, I'd like to share, not a video today, but at some point in the future as we collect these materials, to show what they did over there, as she was a forceful advocate to say, the old school needs to be preserved. It needs to be native, in native hands, native led, and we expect language and our collective rights to be restored as well. And we expect mental and behavioral health services, and not to pay for them. The United States needs to provide the resources for that to happen, and support, you know, the indigenous practitioners that are out there, and we know they're too few and far between. But we need all the ones that are available, and a lot of allies. So up north, what I learned was they actually, so there was a series of litigation in addition to that statute that created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So, you know, maybe Native American Rights Fund and some others can get together, because what happened through the legislation and what they tried to address, they could understand the human rights part of it, but they couldn't understand the collective rights. And the collective rights are like the place, our connection to place, the indigenous knowledge, the language and community, the community ceremonies, the circles that are created for healing. And human rights just doesn't have that collective foundational piece to it. So we need to have both. We need to see the individual healing and the multi-generational, and we need the collective healing together. You know, the grieving that people have when there's a loss. This was a massive set of losses, like catastrophic in some communities. I know we'll wrap up here in just a couple of minutes, but what I've seen up north has given me hope that this can be addressed, and that when we have indigenous leaders out there leading this effort, something positive is going to come out of this. And what we need is all of Indian country to be speaking that they want the legislation, they want the land back, and they want the resources to correct all of the things that need to be restored and revitalized. And that begins with healing. And I'll mention this because one of the things, there was an amazing study by a researcher, First Nations researcher, around the impacts of the residential schools on particular family lines. And what they found was, I think her last name is Dr. Bombay. What she found was that there were the survivors, and they had all their issues associated with what happened, which is, we can all understand that. But the impacts are actually epigenetic. So they continue down the family line. And what she found was the kids and the grandkids of the survivors actually had the same symptoms, and sometimes expressed even more profoundly than the original survivor of the boarding school in that family. And this tracks with what happened in the Holocaust. And they've done studies on rats, mice, about if something happens to one, and say they tested this on a smell of a rat, and then they hit the rat and they did the smell, that they tested the grandchild of that animal, and when the smell came, they got defensive and were waiting to get hit. Can you imagine the implications of that for our people? That's transgenerational and multi-generational trauma, which is in the family lines. And even if you're not directly passing anything from that terrible experience, it's actually in your genetics, and it keeps going. So we're gonna need a lot of research, a lot of help, and it has to have that collective piece to it. But, there are lessons learned out there, and I think that, it does begin with apology, land back, resources, and then you can start the healing process. And I think that's what it's going to require to address something so substantial across Indian country, because there's some 600 boarding schools in the U.S. There's some 500 up north. And I think in Dr. Bombay's study, and this is on Harvard's public health website, the Chan School, there's a link to it if you want to watch it. It was a very powerful presentation. And she said, I think 83% of all Native children are impacted by boarding schools. That's like almost all of them. Even if they didn't go themselves, it was passed through the family line of the survivors. So in reality, what we have are 160 years of impacts that's still living in us and being passed on. That has to be addressed.
And the last thing that I wanted to share, tying back to how elections matter and voting matters, this wouldn't have happened if there weren't Indigenous people in Interior pushing for this to happen, and making these recommendations for the land back, for the language resources, the healing resources, the accountability that comes with greater engagement at the United Nations. When we delivered the first resolutions calling for enforcement of the land back statutes in December of 2021, there wasn't a word of English spoken in the meeting. It was Lakota leaders talking to Lakota speakers, and it was incredibly powerful to have that moment, and it felt like reclaiming something then, to have a meeting in that way.
Yeah, and the final thought I'll add is that Natives are incredibly resilient. They've survived so much. I think we can get this redressed, but it's got to start on that vote, get the right people in, have a lot of strategy and plans around it, and then see how we can take into account all the things that need to be done for this to be addressed rightfully, and for Indian country to begin the healing process.
I had one question before we conclude. That land back program, a lot of these boarding schools were put out in waste areas. So, like in Grand Junction, there was a boarding school there, but the tribes don't want anything to do with it. So this piece of land sitting there, what if on that land back program, we could take those old boarding schools that the tribe didn't want and trade that for pieces of land in park services or different areas?
I think that's a great idea, and because we don't have a statute requiring anything right now, I think we should be listening to people who have ideas like that could be really helpful. It doesn't have to be the old site. It could be something else to start the healing maybe in a new place or a place of their choosing, right? Yeah, that's a great point.
Jen, to give them an idea about land back, will you tell them a little bit about the Rapid City Boarding School and the land that was discovered there?
So there are 3 parcels that form the Rapid City Indian Boarding School, and a dedicated group of volunteers with grandmas starting back in the 1950s started saying to the city of Rapid City, hey, we know this isn't right. We remember that these lands were supposed to come back to the tribes, And they started then, and it's work that has continued very intensively in the last decade, where now the grandchildren of those grandmas are leading the efforts, but they located the graves of dozens of children who died at the school, unmarked graves, and have undertaken ceremony to bring peace to those children. They've also found all of the old records, including a letter from the Rapid City city attorney in 1951, admitting to the grandmas that they were right, saying to the city council, providing them legal advice, hey, we don't have any right to be here. But even knowing against legal advice, the city of Rapid City has put other facilities there, which are in trespass on what should be native land. And we're now calling, all the tribes have written to Assistant Secretary Newland. The treaty councils have passed resolutions, the tribes all have resolutions, and have said over and over and over again now, let's get that land back. And then let's come together and think about what the healing plan is for the highest and best use of those lands in the future.
And I think they did an evaluation on the actual, what the land is worth now, and it's something like, what, 55?
It's $100 million in back rent that they would owe if you just did a standard commercial value for the property for the length of time it's been unlawfully withheld from the tribes.
So, I mean, there's more to the boarding school land back. First of all, is ensuring that it started from the boarding school, and then they received the land, and then they used it against the actual authority they were given to use the land, because it's supposed to go back to tribes. So I'd really, encourage people to look into that, contact your tribes around the boarding school areas, and see whether or not, I bet you City of Phoenix is sitting on a lot of land that could be given back to the tribe, or they're trespassing on. So, I mean, this is something that I think is really important for all tribes to start looking at, because it's all part of the land back. So,
And feel free to contact Colt. Any of us can point you to the resources, send you these presentations and a whole lot more. One other thing I just wanted to dovetail on the connection and importance to voting is to tie back to Dell's presentation yesterday on the general welfare exclusion. One of the really key provisions in that proposed rule is that what is cultural service is up to the tribes to determine. So on a tax-free basis, the tribes can bring that healing into communities. They can invest in behavioral health. They can incentivize the language teachers, the healers, the spiritual people to come in and really do that healing work in a good way, supported by that federal policy of deferring to tribes and what tribes decide is their path to healing.
and then to add on to that, Jen and Dell are going to be doing a template letter, and I want to make sure we get this out there, of that consultation for the IRS rule that's in the Federal Register. It is very important that tribes weigh in on this, because I can tell you right now, every city official, every person that sits in a state government and the county government are writing recommendations to deny that action. And the only way we're going to be able to do this is to ensure that the tribes weigh in. We have to have tribes weigh in. And just so you know, it don't have to be tribes. It could be individual natives that can actually weigh in and actually support that that ruling to be utilized. So there's so much packed into that rule, and again, Dell's been on this forever, Jennifer's been on it forever, Colt has pushed this, but it's nothing but positive for Indian country, throughout Indian country, And we really need everybody's help, not just tribal members. If you have friends that aren't tribal members, we need them to write in. We need them to support it. So I'm going to end this with one question to Dal. What is the ask on the boarding school?
Well, I think it's got to start with everyone reviewing what's available and the information that's out there, and then to get that legislation done so the formal action can happen. And part of the work is done, but the churches have got to provide the records as well. So I think the ask is get the legislation done and get this whole thing moving in a good direction with accountability. And so that support would come from everybody impacted, on and off res.
Okay, thank you. Oh, thank you. Three days, I bet you guys thought I'd never end. Want to do one more? Yeah. I was teasing the other day because when he got done with Stacey Abrams, they got done smoking. It looked like that movie, The Fog, and all of a sudden, all the smoke from the sage disappeared, and Stacey was there, all teary-eyed. But before we do that, can we have the Phoenix Indian School come up? Lisea, where are you at? If you didn't take off on me already, come on up. You know, this wouldn't have happened without the Phoenix Indian Center. I really want to ensure that everybody knows that they were a major part of this whole forum that we had. And it would not have been successful without them. And when we do these things, like I said, we want to put the spotlight on the heroes within our nations or within their nations. And the Phoenix Indian Center is one of those heroes. These young ladies over here that talks, they're heroes. I always said, so with that, you know, I'm going to be quiet for a while, a little bit, but please.
Thank you so much. What an amazing opportunity for our relatives to come together and to support and dialogue around such an important topic. I was very honored when we received the phone call to be a supporter of this event, and I've learned and come to know, you know, really generous relatives throughout Indian country that are doing this work, and I'm excited to be in the know of Four Directions and many of the others that I've learned and got to know. The center is going to be a space here in Phoenix that will continue to join others. I'm a true believer in collaboration versus, you know, trying to do things in silo or by yourself. It's just more of an impact when we work together. And we were honored to be, you know, a helping entity locally because we know our relatives here, we know of the issues and the challenges that we face. And while Indian country does have a lot of similarities, we're also different in some of the challenges we experience here. And I'm grateful for us coming together and really working alongside one another and looking at what's relevant here, but also what's relevant from a broader, high-level view. And so in Navajo, we would say, Bahetensen, thankful, grateful, Ado, Banache Eyaha, Alkaaneja, Ado, Alkitendez Nish, working alongside each other. Ahut a yaha I see nan nishan linigi e bitsado nihitane altso bitsin ishkleji dan lo quet o hayuke dahat ingo ahut a de adoni, right? So the work is done if we collectively work alongside. And I'm grateful, and my team is happy to have supported one another in doing this. This is what we do. We really just, this is This is our everyday grind. We are out there doing, what's the next event? We have the Indigenous Peoples Day event coming up that June's already working on organizing and getting that going. We have our annual Silver and Turquoise Ball. So if you don't know, I'd love to share more information about that. That's our biggest fundraiser that allows us to bring in unrestricted. So that event will actually be here. So I'm grateful I got to go and be on site and kind of figure out logistics for our upcoming event. And then, you know, we move in, this is Native American Recognition Days here in Phoenix. Starts in end of August and it goes all the way to December. So we have powwows, we have a parade, we have our powwow on the 14th, Indigenous Peoples Day, Arizona American Indian Leadership and Excellence Award. So there's just so many different activities. The Indian Center will be engaged and interfacing. So thank you again to all of you for working with us, inviting us. We're happy to do this work. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to end this with one thing that our people had done for centuries when we're getting ready to go into battle. And don't get me wrong, 2024 is going to be a battle. And what you need to also look at in 2024, there's so many people out there that have been trained to interfere with elections. And being tribal nations, this is really, I'm going to stress this, being a tribal nation, the government has the power to remove operatives that are being disrespectful to our elders, taking photographs. I mean, just if they're violating our culture and our tradition, tribes can have the police officers remove them. We still got, there's a lot of tribes like us where we have the treaty where we have the bad man clause, so where we can actually remove them. So if you're having problems within the reservation where you have operatives, and I don't care what side, if you have operatives that are being disrespectful for elders, remember, we have the authority and the power to remove them. So as we have done for centuries in Lakota country, is when we're going into battle, we say hokahe. And this 2024, hokahe. It's a good day to die, but let's do it with a pen, not a bow, not an arrow, and let's just get those people out that are going to be against Indian country, and let's get those people in that are going to be good for Indian country. So with that, wopila. Brother, you gonna do some saging here? Yeah. Yeah. He's carrying around like a dime bag. And just so you know, my daughter, she was given a Lakota named Bear Old Woman, and our granddaughter, her name is Tate Jikala, Little Wind. Hit him with it.
See what happens, only takes a little button and they completely change into Heokas. But I'd like to thank you all. And for an old dinosaur like me, it's makes me feel very proud to be able to sit in a room and listen to all your words and all the warriors that are rising now. You know, when I was a young man, I was in Wounded Knee, and we didn't have this kind of unity. But what now I see today is that we have that unity, and that makes us old dinosaurs proud, so thank you very much. And most of all, I'd like to thank my brother OJ and my first wife for what they do for us. Hey, baby! But what they do for us. For me, they make me proud. They make me proud to be their relative. Proud to stand beside them. Like my brother, sometimes 2, 3 in the morning, I'm downstairs. I don't usually go to bed till like 4 in the morning. And I look at the phone and there's a message from OJ, and he says, pray for me. And I go, OJ, it's 4 in the morning. And I text him back and he says, I know you're praying right now, so pray for me. So we have that direct human contact, and that makes me happy to be able to take care of my relatives like that. So I thank the Great Spirit, Mother Earth, the powers of the 4 directions, the Oyate that has survived the longest here, the Buffalo Nation. I thank them for giving us life, and all of you giving us life, and helping us to learn on this journey. Lila wopilachi chap. Tankashla medaki apinaye. Ushikai chana wachozani no wokiwashte. Wopilachi chaplo medakiasi. I'd like 2 songs today. And one of the songs is, a long time ago, the White Buffalo Calf brought us a very special gift. And so that's why I call my half-side up here. So she represents the women of our culture, the matriarchs. Somewhere along the line, us Lakota men forgot who was really the boss, you know. So I'd like her to start with the Buffalo song, and then my brother to end up with the thank you song.